welcome everybody to the first workshop we have, which is on the fashion industry. Today's topic is going to be fashion, social injustice and oppression. And I've got Anna Farr with me, who is a fashion design graduate from University of Leeds. She also undertook a dissertation in sustainable supply chain management, and will be starting a master's in textile sustainability and innovation in September. Hopefully that's all right.
Mm-hmm.
So a disclaimer about this is that we are talking a lot about fast fashion, but we want to make sure that it also comes across that this is the entire fashion industry. So this expands to luxury fashion as well. And we've also linked within the PowerPoint at the end of the resources, you can find a documentary that kind of goes into the hidden cost of luxury fashion. So don't be misled by the fact that just because it has a higher price tag means it is more ethical, because it is not. So we've got a couple of different questions that we're going to be covering within this first part of the workshop. So we're going to be firstly talking about what allows clothes to be so cheap. Secondly, what is modern slavery in the fashion industry and the different types of that? How does the fashion industry intertwine with feminism? How does the fashion industry disproportionately affect people of colour? How has coronavirus exposed issues within fashion supply chains? And then finally, how can we reduce consumption of fast fashion without compromising the income of workers?
Lots to cover, I guess. There's loads of different sort of aspects to this, really. I think if we start off with, I guess, the basics, what allows clothes to be so cheap? I remember, I think it was that you phrased that question initially, and I was like, oh my God, yeah, that is really the start of it, really. Yeah. Because it's what the fast fashion system is based on. Mm-hmm. I mean, the fast fashion system is an accelerated business model, really, so that businesses can churn out a lot of product and get a lot of profit from it. Yeah. So if you think about why these clothes are so cheap in the first place, there's quite a few factors. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of production has been offshored to other countries, mainly in the global south and the Far East, because they have really cheap labour costs over there. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of get around some of the laws that we might have over here in the West. It's a lot cheaper to produce clothes over there. Mm-hmm. As well, there's low quality materials. You know, if you think of the cheapest brands, these clothes aren't going to last very long because of there's mixed content, fibre, fabrics. So you've got poly cotton rather than polyester or cotton. Those fabrics are also more difficult to recycle and things. And you think about if you're buying a wool coat or something, have a look, see how much wool's actually in the coat, because a lot of companies put a fibre called acrylic. It's very similar to wool, but it's way cheaper, and they will put a lot of that in with the wool, and it makes the garment overall a lot cheaper, but they might still advertise it as a wool coat. Yeah. Also, mass production systems, if you buy in bulk, it's a lot cheaper, and then if you can't sell all of that, it's really easy to just discount it all and get rid of the rest, or even just send it to landfill. It's cheaper to buy in bulk rather than small lines. We have the unfair distribution of profits as well. We've seen that recently in terms of not getting, workers at the other end of the supply chain not getting living wages. It's something that can be quite hidden, but it's definitely there. Cutting costs in terms of quality control and having not great technology in factories. These factories do not have the money to invest in new systems. And then also during the buying process itself, of when a buyer, a textile or a fashion buyer, will push for tighter margins, and they will really sort of barter with the suppliers and be like, can you do it for this price? Can you do it for this price? When you compare that with all the different suppliers, you tell one to, I'm going to do it for this price, and then another one be like, oh, I'll do it for you for even cheaper. It brings it down. So it's all these sort of elements that are pushing the price down and making the margins really tight. So there's a lot of factors, but they all kind of come together, really.
On the barter system thing, I saw something in the Fixing Fashion document, which we'll link as well as part of this presentation. I think was it in Manchester? Was it Boohoo or because it said that in there, they had a buying room where they would also bring in suppliers, and then they would kind of like what's the word, like barter with their suppliers, like while they were in the room, and kind of negotiate, and then kind of encourage basically the suppliers to just knock down costs. So someone was like, I'll do this for £5, and then on hearing like the disapproval from the board, the next supplier would be like, oh, actually I can do it for £4, which is just like really, it's kind of more about like securing the business rather than like
the competition.
Yeah, and it's just a bit like, it's kind of like a sort of dog eat dog mentality, isn't it? Like they're not actually trying to encourage like sustainable and like quality products. They're just trying to get it
in the collaborative sense from it as well.
Yeah,
there isn't that sort of relationship there. It's very much, can you do this for me for really cheap? You don't build up a relationship, and it's quite unusual to have it in that way, that you would have them all together.
Yeah,
and to all do it. But I think when you want quick turnaround in things, it probably is quicker and easier to do it like that, and you can get that cheaper margin.
We've also got like from the Fixing Fashion notes as well. There was a quote from Paul Lister, who worked for Primark, and somebody was like posing the question, how are your clothes so cheap? And he said, in the case of Primark, it was more to do with the fact that they don't advertise. I found this a bit suspect because, yes, they don't advertise, but at the same time, like you can walk into Primark and get stuff for like, you can get like a t-shirt for like £1. And like, obviously he says, we do no advertising. You've seen no billboards, no television advertising. Primark has never done any significant advertising at all. And I feel like this is just like another case of companies like trying to greenwash with like things that kind of make sense. Like it does sort of make sense that they don't advertise, and therefore they don't need to spend a large amount of money on that. They've said, I think they save about 100 million to 150 million pound a year. But at the same time, like that doesn't address the fact that their clothes are like £1, £2, £3 for an item. So do you know any more about like Primark in that case, or is that just like, does that scream like greenwashing to you?
I think with Primark, because they don't spend any money on advertising and branding, it's all very simple. You do get, you do save costs there, but you can't ignore that the clothes are still so cheap.
Yeah.
The thing is, with brands like Primark, they tend to be, although now I think it's different, used to be, not as trend driven as others like Boohoo, Misguided, Pretty Little Thing, because they were able to get such cheap margins because they would make their orders a long time in advance and get the product produced in places like Bangladesh where the labour costs are cheap. And if you do it in advance, it will be cheap. And also it's such a big retailer, they do it in mass. So you kind of save all that money there.
Yeah.
The stuff that's more problematic is the ones that are really trend driven and that will have quick turnovers. It's cheaper, for them, if they were just going to say, we need like 10,000 black t-shirts, probably a lot more, 100,000 black t-shirts. It's kind of, and you can do that so far in advance because that style will still be in fashion in a year's time.
Yeah.
But if you do a little sort of floral mini skirt or something, the print's on trend, and you do that much closer to the sale point, it might be, we want that within a month, we want that in a couple of weeks. That's when you start cutting corners, you start overworking all the people in the factories, you start bringing in extra help that isn't audited. That's when more of the issues occur. So I do think Primark is kind of doing more trendy stuff now, which I worry about more so than the basics. I think their basics are probably quite well sort of audited and more sustainable, really. The stuff that's not, just going to be on fashion for a month, that's the issue where the issue lies, I think.
Because the trend stuff as well, like, has a really big issue in terms of like what you do with your clothes after as well, because like that kind of if you get like what was really popular, like the tops with like really big sleeves that are quite popular at the moment, like, and like really big like puffy shoulder pad things, like they're probably not going to be popular for like into next year. So you're going to get loads of people buying stuff like that, and like last year it was like square necks and stuff, which I'm not seeing as much now. So you've got people with these things and they're like, well, I don't want them anymore, like I'll just throw them out, give them to a charity shop, or maybe like I'll just keep it in my wardrobe and then like fill it up with like more stuff that is then going to go out of fashion like really quickly. So I suppose like it doesn't, it's good that they are doing like basics, because like they're hopefully going to last longer in people's wardrobes.
You're not going to get sick of them. It's the marketing as well. The marketing, if you're constantly on your Instagram, you're getting push notifications and emails and stuff all the time. You're being like fed all that. You know, this is the trend of the month. This is what you need to buy, and you know, subconsciously you'll be like, oh, you know, you might like it, but it might just be that because it's really trendy, you like it.
Yeah, exactly. Shall we move on to talk about modern slavery? Because I feel like this is like a really big push
that was something
point.
A lot of people wanted to know about. Yeah,
it's a really big push point at the moment, especially because of Black Lives Matter, and how specifically people are starting to condemn like statues of slavers, whereas like you don't see that as much condemnation of like modern slavery within fashion supply chains. So if you just go on and explain a little bit about what it is and like the different types of modern slavery.
I think modern slavery is really sort of big in the fashion industry because it is so well hidden. You can, with the way it works is that there is so many suppliers and so many subcontractors and things that it's really hard to keep track of. And then, you know, cases get hidden and there's loopholes in, especially with the UK Modern Slavery Act. We've talked about that before. In terms, I think there's it was the International Labour Organization, I've got it written here, estimate that at any given time an estimated 40.3 million people are in modern slavery globally, but no one really knows the true figure because of a lot of it is hidden. And I guess some people might think, what does modern slavery look like now? Because, you know, you'd hope you've not got people sort of chained up like you would think. In terms of the different types of slavery that you would get in the supply chain would be things like forced labour, bonded labour or debt labour, child labour, prison labour, and human trafficking, which are all awful. They are still prevalent in the industry. And the fashion industry, according to the Global Slavery Index, is one of the biggest contributors. And as well, in terms of modern slavery compared to what the fashion industry is based off, globalization and sort of modern industrialization in the 18th and 19th centuries, they were built on these systems of oppression and exploitation, mainly of people of colour, and that still exists today because of how deep-rooted it is. It's not sort of a recent thing. And I think there's some stuff coming out in the press recently. It's like, oh, this has just come out recently, but this has been happening for years. It's just that people are starting to realise. Yeah,
it is kind of like sad that it takes so long for something to come out, and it has to be done in like a shock factor way. Like we were talking before about how it has to kind of be done like close to home, like with the Leicester example, which we'll talk about a bit more later. Like it's more shocking because it is in Leicester, whereas like it's kind of, you hear like talk of like sweatshops and like everybody's like heard of sweatshops, but you just think, oh yeah, that's like something in the global south. It's so far removed from me that like I don't have to care about it. And I feel like that's like we've like lost a lot of empathy in terms of like who is making our clothes and kind of the conditions that they're in. And it just takes like a shocking wake up call to show you that it's still happening, even though it's like there's so much evidence of it. Like when you research H&M, Zara, Fashion Over, I think recently, like in October 2019, they were like busted for modern slavery. Like there's just so many cases of it, like, and not even just in the fashion industry, like in Haribo even got done for modern slavery as well, which is like, you just don't expect that. I mean, I wouldn't expect that because I go looking for like fashion modern slavery, but when you see like a sweet company, I mean, you just think literally it's kind of like systemic in that it's sort of everywhere in like every big industry. But it does take
and the scary thing is that a lot of companies don't know themselves that that's going on in their own supply chains. I know Boohoo, after they'd audited recently, they were like, they were saying that they're less, that I think was it the Sunday Times, the figure they'd put out was false. But actually we have found other issues that we need to work on. They didn't even realise at the time. They had to step in.
60% of companies have got modern slavery statements. But another issue, like with the Modern Slavery Act, which is kind of like companies. It basically just requires companies to say that they're doing something, and even
the law, it's companies of a certain size have to disclose basically what they're doing to combat slavery.
But it's there's so many loopholes with it, because you can. I read that you can actually be compliant by saying you're not doing anything. And then we've got like just two examples, like Valentino and Foot Locker are non-compliant, as in they don't have a statement. But then even if they do have a statement, like the big examples, H&M and Zara are really like massively on the surface against modern slavery, and like whenever they've been busted for it in the past, they've always gone back to the statement and said, no, we're always against it, we didn't know this was happening. And it's always this case of not knowing, because what they do is they pass accountability down through to the suppliers basically, and say it was their fault, because they're the ones who were directly responsible for this factory. And they kind of get away with that, because people are like, oh yeah, they didn't know, like it's okay, they didn't realise, but they should know. And like the bigger issue is that they aren't tracing their supply chains, and that's like, who knows what else is going on. If they had no idea about an instance of slavery, what else are they missing?
And it's worse to just say we're cutting ties with these suppliers that we didn't realise were issues, because you're not fixing any problems. You're just removing yourself from the issue and saying we don't want anything to do with that anymore. But you can't cut the ties with them. You can't, you're then getting rid of all their income from the factory, probably very quickly, because you could just cut the ties like that. They need to help them and change the system. That is their supply, that is their responsibility. They need to be like, right, you guys need to put these measures in place, we'll help you do that, and we will still give you business once you fix that, rather than being like, that's not our responsibility, we're not doing business with them anymore, that's it, the problem's it's not a problem anymore.
Exactly.
It's really problematic, really.
So we've got some information on like living wages, and obviously you've got the case of Leicester, which is like the big thing on everyone's minds at the minute, with £3.50 an hour being like the staple rate, £5 an hour being like a really good rate, which is just shocking. So like
not legal either. So I guess with a living wage, in terms of what it is, it's sort of the minimum amount that a worker would need to support themselves and their family, in terms of food and water and housing and things like that. But low pay is so common in the fashion industry that it's perpetuating systems of poverty, mainly in the developing nations, that you can't, when you say like, oh, we're working on it, but you're still not paying workers a living wage. It's the problem's never going to go away if it's like that. And it's constant as well. And I think we've got on the PowerPoint some stats here. Deloitte revealed that just 4% of the price of a piece of clothing is estimated to make it back to the workers, which you think is a tiny amount. Where is the rest of that money going? Probably profit. And even if the brands pass the entire cost increase of paying living wages onto the consumer, the price of a piece of clothing would increase by just 1%, which surprised me. I thought it would be a lot more, and I thought that's the issue. It's a lot more. The cost would be massive in terms of if they were to put. That's why they weren't doing it in the first place, because they were saving so much money on it. But if it's just going to increase price of clothing by 1%, why aren't you doing it?
Yeah, it's all about kind of like corporate greed, basically, because I mean most of pretty much all of like the fashion giants like H&M, Zara. I can't think of any other examples than H&M and Zara at the moment. But,
it's just they're the ones off the top of the head, because they're the ones that talk about it the most.
They're the ones that I dislike the most. But like Amancio Ortega, who is or maybe was quite until recently the CEO of Zara, was at one point like the richest man in the world, and he still wasn't paying his workers living wage. And there's been so many cases of Zara just not even paying their workers at all. Like even until like 2017, I think in Turkey, some workers were like slipping notes in to say like, we weren't paid for this garment that you were about to buy.
Yes, I heard about that.
Yeah, and like he's the richest man in the world. Like he's a multi-billionaire. Like how can you justify having someone so rich at the one end of the supply chain, and then people who literally aren't being paid at the other end of the supply chain? Like it's just all about increasing profits. It's completely inhumane. It is inhumane, and it really sickens me, like just to read about like how rich they like the heads of these companies are. And like H&M, I was reading the CEO of that, he's like recently just stepped down like 2 months ago, is like the richest man in Sweden, and his company has gone to his son, who's also another millionaire in Sweden.
Yeah, and what's worrying as well is that a lot of people, a lot of young entrepreneurs are seeing the profit that you can get from fast fashion brands. And so there's if you think about the past 5-10 years, how many new ones we're seeing and how successful they're getting so quickly. It's such an attractive business concept for someone who wants to make money and make money quickly, which I think is the main issue, because there's no long-term, you can't see any long-term effect of it because the businesses are still so young and so successful.
Should we talk about, we've kind of talked about the supply chain. Should we talk a little bit about like trade unions and kind of the issues with that and the fashion industry? Trade
unions are a massive issue in the fashion industry, and it's one that I wasn't aware of until sort of the past sort of year. Industrial, we've got a statement here, state that over 90% of workers in the global garment industry have no possibility to negotiate their wages or working conditions. I think it's something about 8% of them aren't in a union, which is a massive amount.
Yeah.
In terms of what trade union is, if you're not aware, is a group of employees who join together to maintain and improve their terms of employment. The International Labour Organization say it's an integral part of a free and open society. So it's basically you being able to negotiate your wages and your working conditions with your employer, and just having a good relationship with them in terms of if you're part of a trade union, they will let you know your rights. They will help you if you have any issues at work, and they will be a voice for you.
Yeah.
But, a majority of the garment workers in the fashion industry do not have that, and they do not know their rights. They do not have any rights, and they have no sort of way of saying, oh, I can't afford to feed my family, I need a higher wage, because they are intimidated. There's violence involved. They will lose their job if they speak up about it. And there has been issues as well of people coming together to form trade unions or to form groups and go ahead. But I mean, we've read some of the examples that they will be fired.
So we've got like the recent issue of Zara and Primark firing workers in Myanmar after they formed a union, which came out a couple of weeks ago. So again, Zara and Primark at the forefront of everything. And then it was suggested by employees that factory owners were using coronavirus as an excuse to fire members. This was from Myanmar, which is based in Myanmar. And it saw, so the past couple of months has seen 571 workers fired, with 520 of those being union members. And one employee stated, the bosses used COVID as an opportunity to get rid of us because they hated our union.
Yeah, and these cases are like of them being fired and things. It's trying to stamp them out and be like, no, you need to do exactly, it's almost like I own you and you will do as I say and you will work for me. And
yeah, and even in like, because of, there's a lot of issues of like child labour, children like don't, like they are desirable because they don't know that they have rights and they don't know like how to go about getting their rights and stuff. And I think it was, I read about cotton being picked in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan largely, which is largely done by children because they have like smaller fingers to kind of pick the cotton and not break the plant. So yeah, like they have absolutely no rights because they don't know how to go about bargaining for their own rights because they are children.
Yeah, and they're terrified. They can't speak up for themselves. And in Uzbekistan, which is one of the worst places in terms of getting cotton, it is one of the places you see the worst labour issues. The government there is so corrupt that it forces citizens to pick cotton and harvest it every year so that they can, because that is their main export. It is the main place they get their money from. So the government actively forces citizens, and there will be consequences if they don't, to go out and pick cotton, including kids. They have to drop out of school to help their families pick cotton and things, just so we can wear the clothes we want.
Okay, let's talk about fashion and feminism.
Yeah. In terms of feminism, I think there is, especially the past recent years, it's become quite a marketable thing. brands can say, look, we'll appeal to the women by saying we're feminists. But if we think about it, in the supply chain, women are at the most risk and are the most vulnerable and are oppressed the most.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of women in the fashion industry and in the garment producing sector, they are in the lowest paid roles and the most vulnerable ones. They are underrepresented in managerial roles and supervisor roles in the factories, therefore their voices are not heard. There is often abuse, harassment, and they've got sort of no one to turn to because everyone above them are usually men. Mm-hmm. We've got more stats here. Around 70 to 80% of the workers in the fashion and textile industry are women. That is a massive amount. Mm-hmm. You know, and they're the ones that are vulnerable. It says, according to the World Policy Analysis Centre, more than 1/3 of countries around the world do not have any laws prohibiting sexual harassment at work, leaving 235 million women vulnerable on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. So, as we said, talking about like you're buying a feminist T-shirt or something, you might be thinking, this is great, you know, I'm standing for what's right. But if you think about where that T-shirt has come from, it might be someone who is a woman, a person of colour in a factory, mm-hmm. You know, a victim of abuse, harassment, bonded labour, you know, mm-hmm. There's so many underlying issues that come with it mm-hmm. that for many companies saying that they stand for feminism and completely ignoring the issues that oppress women in their supply chain further down, it's really hypocritical. Yeah. And also it's not just in the garment producing side in terms of, if you think about the people that own the top fashion houses, it's a lot better than it is now, but typically it's always been men.
Mm-hmm. It's usually white men at that as well, like middle-aged white men kind of deciding
that own the businesses, mm-hmm. and profit the most from it.
Yeah.
While the women are, mm-hmm. although yes, the majority of the workforce is women, they are in the worst paid, most vulnerable, you know, most likely to lose their job roles mm-hmm. in the garment sector.
Yeah, I think it is like an issue of like oppressing people of colour as well, because this happens like largely in the global south, largely in like Southeast Asian countries, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Myanmar, India, kind of Bangladesh. But it is like an issue that affects more like people of colour, as opposed to just
definitely.
You don't see that much oppression in terms of like at the lowest end of the supply chain of white workers.
Yeah, and a lot of people that work in the factories in Leicester are migrants or refugees mm-hmm. because that's work for them, and it's low skilled work as well, mm-hmm. which a lot of the people in the UK don't want.
Yeah,
that kind
exactly.
of work.
I think as well in terms of like the fashion and feminism end of things, and like it's white feminism that kind of gets focused on in a lot of like mainstream sort of feminist dialogue. So like you have those T-shirts that were a good example, like quite a while ago, that were like, mm-hmm. I'm a feminist, and people like Benedict Cumberbatch and like some like famous actors wore them, and then it came out that those were made by oppressed women in like the global south. And I see a lot of T-shirts being used like to perpetuate these kind of messages, like people getting like T-shirts for like BLM and T-shirts for like feminism and other kind of issues, and like when you wear the T-shirt you are really questioning where it's come from, and like to be adding to that cycle of like forced labour, modern slavery, it's like much worse for the people on like the receiving end of that, while you can come across as someone who like outwardly looks like they care about a lot of causes, and it is like kind of performative activism at the end of the day.
Yes, and you question the morals of the company that's done that in the first place, because yes, you might hope that they're like, let's support these people, let's make a T-shirt, mm-hmm. you know, with hashtag BLM or hashtag I'm a feminist, and you think, oh yeah, you would hope that they're just being supportive, but there is also that worry that, oh, they've seen this as a marketing opportunity and a way for them to.
Yeah.
And again, it's so quick, the turnaround, you know, they've got these T-shirts on the site within a week or two.
Yeah.
You've got to worry how they did that.
Yeah.
In such numbers so quickly.
Exactly. I've got a specific example that I have just come up like in the past couple of weeks is In the Style, which is kind of an Instagram fashion company with sort of it kind of bases itself off like Love Island influencers and stuff wearing their clothes.
It's awful.
It's terrible. It's really terrible. I absolutely hate it. They made a T-shirt which was a stolen design, which is just another issue from an independent artist. They also it was a design basically of like two hands kind of linking up like this. One was darker skin, one was light skin. They actually lightened the skin tones of the original drawing, which is just like a whole other issue in itself. And they had that on their site. Like, it was literally a week. They announced it, put this little graphic on, and then the week later, they had these T-shirts ready to go. And then it kind of, everyone was sort of outraged by it. First off, this company is not diverse. Like, they've never championed like diverse voices.
And that is their choice as well.
Yeah,
they chose not to work with those influencers.
Yeah, you have like all these issues, and they've got this T-shirt that kind of paints them as being like really inclusive, a really lovely brand, but actually underneath it all, they don't champion diverse voices. They are like definitely oppress people within their supply chain if it's that fast, and they stole a design. And then even like when the design was outed as being stolen, they didn't even like go back and correct it on the original post. It was just sort of in the comments that this girl had been like,
they're not even credit. I mean, you should pay them if you're going to profit from it.
Like I spoke to the girl, and she said it was kind of like all sorted, and she's not that, like, she's bothered obviously, but like it's kind of all sorted now. But it's just like another issue of like fashion companies like really like pushing this performative activism, especially at the moment with BLM, and especially when it comes to like the feminist T-shirts and stuff, while also like massively oppressing the very people that they claim to be like uplifting the voices of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about like feminism and like issues with like fashion and people of colour. Let's move on to the effects of coronavirus and how it's kind of exposed issues within the supply chains, especially in Leicester.
Yeah. In terms of coronavirus, I think because so many brands lost out so much money because of lockdowns, it really exposed them for how they were treating the workers. In terms of a lot of them completely either delayed payments or stopped them altogether going to their suppliers. So these people, mainly in the global south, as we've said, were left without money. They can't feed themselves. You know, a lot of them were dismissed because there was no work. So they've lost their jobs. They can't feed their families. They can't pay for medical care. And it became such a big problem because there was, with coronavirus, it was such a sort of, you couldn't plan for it. It was just all of a sudden, we're going to close all the shops, which took a massive hit to profits. But the people, you know, that own these companies are not affected because they're billionaires and millionaires. It's the people at the other end that were left with nothing because they just stopped payments. And apparently that's fine to do, you know. We've seen recently the #PayUp movement, which is pushing for them to pay, which has got some success stories out of it so far, which is great, but there's still a really big number of brands that haven't been paying their suppliers because of how badly they've been affected by it. And for them, that is a place that they can cut costs. They can do it at the other end where seemingly you don't, you know, we can't see, some people don't notice. And in terms of Leicester as well, there's a big garment producing sort of, it's a big area in the UK. That's one of the main sites for garment production. And in terms of the second lockdown, we can't see it as a coincidence because we've heard reports of a lot of people being forced to go into work still. Otherwise they won't be paid or might lose their jobs. I mean, and with people shopping at home and things, I think that online shops, that increased because I guess people are sat at home and thinking, oh, I'll clear out my wardrobe, let's buy a new one. So the demand was still there for online retailers, so they still had to meet that. So they were getting people to go in without preparing, so without having any PPE or social distancing measures. And so they're just not compliant in that sense. but they're still pushing for it. And it absolutely will have contributed to the second lockdown, really. And that's why Boohoo got so caught up in all of this, because their production facilities, I think 70 to 80% of the production facilities in Leicester are made, or Boohoo have clothing being produced in those factories.
And with coronavirus, not just in Leicester as well, like within the global south, there's been a lot of cases of people being forced to go into work with no social distancing. A lot of companies also moved to making masks. So like in a lot of the cases where they were making masks, the people who were making them didn't even have a mask to wear themselves, and they were having to like pay out of their own pocket to get PPE. And even in that case, like what grade of PPE is that? They're having to go into work where there's absolutely no social distancing measures with a mask that they bought out of their own money and may or may not even work. Coronavirus has really it's just made everybody be like massively aware and kind of shocked about all the
exposed issues. So many, I think, that it, especially a lot of people didn't realise that it was going on our doorstep, and it took that to realise, oh wow, this really is a problem. Yeah,
like the fact that it is like it's in Leicester. I mean, it happens in the US as well. The Fashion Over instance that was talking about earlier from last year, that was in LA, which is, you think of LA, you think of like film stars and stuff. You don't think of like people being forced into situations of modern slavery to make garments for like a shitty online fashion company. It's so sort of systemic and ingrained that at this point, like it literally could be anywhere, but it's just sort of more shocking when it's in Leicester.
They've seen the effects of it as well in terms of going into a second lockdown.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's just really like proven how bad these companies are in terms of like health and safety, how little they care for their workers.
And as well, I think with it's not always completely obvious or overt either, in terms of, you don't see, in general in the fashion industry, you don't see the factories pumping out loads of chemicals and dumping things in rivers. You don't see it, so you're like, oh, nothing must be going on. But, you know, if you look at the small print, these workers aren't being paid a living wage. They don't have any rights. They're being forced to go to work. They don't have that sort of protection, that legal protection, which is why a big issue is the legislation as well. Like we can see that there are loopholes in the UK Modern Slavery Act. They don't have to act on them.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the final point we're going to talk about is how can we reduce our consumption or perhaps like boycott without compromising workers' safety and workers' wages. So how would you suggest that we can do that?
Yeah, this was a thing I think a lot of people were interested to know, because you'd think initially you're like, right, let's boycott this brand, let's take them down. And although that sounds great, it doesn't always, as we said before, the people that are in the top positions, the CEOs, are not affected by that. They will cut costs at the other end. And there's people like COVID-19 that are without food, without jobs, without money, really. So I think what I would suggest, I've got a few things on the PowerPoint in terms of what you can do, is you want to avoid that passive boycott of, you know, completely just shutting down from it and being like, because they don't know why you've done that. I think you need to be vocal about it, and you need to contact the brands and say, this is what I'm concerned about. They might be able to reply to you and say, oh, actually, you know, you're concerned about our living wages. Look at what we're doing. I'm not sure if that would happen, but you need to contact them and say what you're concerned about and tell them, I will not shop with you unless you change this. Fast fashion brands, especially these younger ones, are completely dependent on their consumer behaviour. They will respond to what the consumer wants. And at the minute, I mean, for the past decade or two, it's people want quick delivery and people want cheap clothes. So that is what the industry is responding to. Fair enough, that's where they see the consumer demand. But if you start demanding, you start saying you want to know where your clothes have come from, you want to know who's made them, then they will start to do that, because they will see that they will lose a big amount of customers if they don't. But if they're just seeing their customer numbers dropping or the traffic to their site dropping, they might just push out more marketing. They don't know what you want. You need to tell them what you want. And there's an email template on the Fashion Revolution website, which is great, that you can just fill in and send up to brands, whoever you want. We were saying with the pay up movement as well, that's something that's specific to the COVID-19 pandemic. You wanted to support that way. And there is other things like donating. I've linked the Fashion Revolution website. They have a breakdown of all the different charities that they support in terms of if you preferred to do it that way as opposed to contacting the brands or whatever, if you wanted to donate directly to the workers. And there's also an initiative recently that's come out called Lost Stock. You basically get because we've talked about all these brands cancelling all their orders, you've got warehouses full of stock that's not going to be sold, especially, I mean, the shops are open again now, but when, that stuff might have been out of date, that might have been behind in their range plan. So Lost Stock's initiative that was set up during the pandemic, I think you fill in sort of a style questionnaire and they will send out a box of clothes to you of stock that would have gone to waste or has been cancelled by many brands. So if you're still you want some new clothes still, because naturally, we all do sometimes, maybe go through there, and the money from that supports, I think, it's Garment Workers, the Sajida Foundation, I think. And so you are contributing again to them while still sort of getting some clothes if you need some. And as well, I think if you can, contact the policymakers, because legislation is a really important thing and will force brands to act. And just sharing it on social media, I think, and just educating other people. And I think that's the best thing. That's what we're doing here, just talking to other people about it.
When you are contacting the brands, you might, we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the third part, which is how to be a mindful consumer. But you need to kind of also be aware that they may lie or may kind of cover up the truth of it.
Direct you to their website is quite a common one. Go see our policy on our website.
So, exactly. H&M is my biggest hate. They have a massive sustainability section on their website. It literally has so many different tabs. It looks wonderful. It's a great design of a website. It makes you think. It puts you at rest. It does. You're like, oh, everything's thank God. Fine. They've got a sustainability section, but you can't just stop there. You need to also search them on, search them separately on Google. Search kind of the scandals that they've been in. You don't just blindly listen to them. And if they say, we've got a modern slavery statement, now all the loopholes that can be you can go through while also complying with the Modern Slavery Act.
Be aware of the boycott, especially at the minute, in terms of who it's affecting most, but that doesn't mean shop with them. I think the big thing is demanding from the brands, letting them know this is the problem. You don't have to shop from them, but you can try, you can tell them, I'm not happy with this. I think this should be changed. I think you should put these measures into place. And you need to see evidence from that, which is something we talk about later in terms of greenwashing. They might say, and I know Boohoo they've said, we're going to look at our supply chain and we're going to eradicate modern slavery. How? When? And are you going to update us on this? It's
more of an issue of actively boycotting and passively boycotting. So actively boycott, don't passively boycott. I think that's pretty much everything we've got to talk about in this whole session. It is massively long. It's probably going to definitely not be 20 to 30 minutes, but that's fine. That's fine. We'll see. We're also going to link the PowerPoint that Anna's made, and then it's got more helpful resources on it, and we can just share any more resources that we find will be helpful. Also the links we mentioned, to the Lost Stock website, the Fashion Revolution template, so you can find all of those. I'll link them probably within the post, or at least within the PowerPoint. The next part we're going to be talking about is on the environmental consequences of the fashion industry, and then tune in for the third part, which is where we're going to go into a little bit more detail about how to be a mindful consumer and avoid greenwashing. So thank you everybody for watching. Hope you enjoyed this.
It's been great.
Hope it was informative.